Blue strobes combed the snow-packed yard, while red dots trembled across a black pelt that refused to flinch. Breath plumed from the rifles and folded into the wind, thin as silk, then shredded against the porch rail. The cabin seemed to hold its lungs, timber ribs creaking under the storm's steady shove. A mug rattled on a windowsill, ceramic teeth chattering in time with a heart that had learned war's metronome. The animal didn't pace, it measured. Weight shifted once, aligning bone and purpose, then settled against the man's knee with deliberate grace. From the timberline, a low answer rolled across drifts, not quite a howl, more like a key turning somewhere cold and far. An officer's finger found first pressure. Snow began again, fine as ash, dusting boot prints into rumor. Beneath the porch steps, a rust-dark fleck clung to wood, winter's old coin refusing to disappear. Headlights climbed the switchbacks like patient fireflies, chains ticking hard truths against ice. A pickup nosed through the barricade of official trucks and stopped where the road narrowed to decision. Doors thumped. Paper uniforms stared. A second set of tracks led to the porch, wider strides, older confidence, the kind that comes from 1,000 cold mornings and too many hard endings. The yard carried that metallic hush after adrenaline, the fragile quiet before weather decides to fight again. The neighbor scanned angles and exits without breaking the surface of the moment. Sirens dimmed to a blue pulse on snow, heartbeat light keeping time. Across the meadow, elk stood in pews of frost, solemn as witnesses. Inside the cabin, a stove glowed like a private chapel, amber glass breathing steady. Outside, tension braided itself into the wind and waited for the next sharp thing to cut through.
Clipboards crowded the steps, steaming coffee braced like courage in paper cups. A woman in winter wool threaded between shoulders and rifles, the only figure whose gaze held both science and sorrow. Fluorescent memories from exam rooms flickered behind her calm face. Calipers, scales, strange measurements that refused to be domesticated. The scene didn't need speeches, it needed translation. Animal, human, law, mountain. 4 languages circling a single truth, too big for signatures. She studied the black figure at the man's side and read the posture that said barrier and bond, not threat. Paper rustled with rules. Snow hissed its objection against parka sleeves. The storm pressed closer, curious. Somewhere behind the tree line, voices arranged themselves into chords, ancient notes asking newer questions. The woman placed her hand on policy and remembered pulse, breath, scent, variables statistics forget. Wind carried the smell of pine, iron, and turning weather. The yard shrank to geometry, muzzle angles, fence lines, the narrow throat of the path where things would break first. The black animal lifted his head and took inventory the way mountains do, slow, complete, unafraid. Hackles rippled once, not warning, calibration. Ear tilt mapped every mechanical click into location, intention, consequence. The kneecap beside his shoulder ticked under old scars. Breathing shifted from combat sharp to something steadier, coached by fur and presence. Snow feathered onto guard hairs and clung like salt to a tide-wet rock. The animal's weight leaned a fraction, enough to move a man back toward stillness without argument. Across the frozen meadow, a raven wrote a black accent mark onto white silence, amended it with a second, then left the sentence unfinished. The red dots quivered, searching for purchase on a body that had already chosen where to stand and who to stand for.
Fingers tightened to the tremor before commitment, that fine threshold where grip becomes consequence. The storm inhaled. Sirens muted themselves to a throat hum under wind. Time thinned until it might tear. Under the porch, a single drop of thaw slid from old blood and vanished into powder, erasing a small history no one saw. The animal's eyes gathered light and returned it as amber, reflective and steady, a calm mirror offered to a shaking world. Somewhere in the timber, something answered, harmonic and low, a frequency felt in bone more than ear. The rifle steadied, the red constellation hardened. The man's pulse kicked once, then fell into the slow cadence drilled by years of held lines. A breath crested, suspended at the peak. The next sound should have been impact. Instead, memory struck first, dragged the scene backward, and flung it into a night sharpened by knives of wind. The storm wrote its thesis in white, then underlined it in red. A thin seam stitched from the trees to the porch, too straight for accident, too clean for survival. He followed it with numb fingers cupping a lantern stutter, boots finding wood through drifts by memory alone. On the step, a small black geography trembled, heat leaking into a world that took warmth as tax. Breath came in torn paper sounds. Paws spread too wide for the body's story. He lifted the bundle, and it folded into the hollow of his coat, a coal pressed against rib and resolve. Inside, the stove hesitated, then believed, glass fogging with each exhale the room learned. Outside, wind scoured tracks until clues became rumor. The blood smeared once across the threshold and set like varnish. Survival shrank to simple math. Heat, time, patience, and the stubborn currency of breath.
The room reduced itself to useful things: towels, kettle, lamp, a scatter of old field manuals stacked like faith under a leaking roof. Heat gathered in corners and learned the shape of need. The tiny chest made its small arguments against the cold, ribs counting to margins and back again. Milk found water, water found a dropper, and hands found a rhythm steadier than recollection. The logbook opened to a clean page and accepted numbers that felt like prayers coded in ink. Outside, glass-fine snow hissed against the door. Inside, the stove translated that hiss into something softer, breath aligned to breath. The bundle smelled of iron and wet stone, an honest scent with edges. Hours slipped their boots off and padded through like ghosts that finally understood their job. By dawn, the room had a pulse. By dawn, the man did too, faint, stubborn, and usable. Morning arrived with a mercy that didn't announce itself, only steadied what it found. The bundle's lungs learned the depth between in and out, that narrow hallway where decisions are made without speaking. The stove glass cleared and showed a reflection that didn't look like rescue so much as a truce. A man hollowed by noise, a creature built for quiet, both borrowing heat they didn't own yet. Numbers in the logbook climbed from fragile to possible. The house shed some of its echo. Outside, the storm downgraded to weather. He measured the pause again and lost the argument with denial. Eyes opened like poured amber, thin and bright, assessing without pleading. The metronome in his chest shifted, abandoned combat tempo, accepted a slower step. Somewhere under the porch, blood darkened to a memory. Somewhere behind the eyes, intelligence filed the room away with care and chose to stay.
Fluorescent light flattened colors and confidence. Metal tables, poster promises, the rubbery snap of a glove preparing to learn truth. The scale spoke first and broke math. Calipers traced a map no breed chart wanted. Teeth sketched an alphabet meant for winter, not living rooms. The woman in scrubs navigated with routine until routine failed, then borrowed patience from experience and set it gently on the counter. Bottles lined up like tactics: antibiotics, dewormer, formula, schedules with military margins.
Paperwork pretended the world was simple and nearly convinced the room. The drive back rode on tire hiss and the soft percussion of breath from a box that already knew the shape of the man's voice. Paws draped over cardboard like tools waiting for instruction. Wind chased clouds across Blackfoot names and logging scars. Home waited, the only geography that ever held its ground when memory advanced. Dark arrived honest, no theatrics, just the quiet certainty of winter doing its work. The cabin's corners rounded under fire's slow grammar. Shadows climbed walls and learned the stove's pulse. Orange blooming to yellow, falling to coal red, repeating like a lullaby for hard men and harder animals. Outside, wind moved snow into soft architecture, drifts smoothing the yard's old arguments. Inside, the metronome settled, a good soldier finally allowed to stand down. The small body breathed in even counts and turned heat into sleep, mastering the math faster than the man who measured it. The logbook closed on numbers that meant maybe. The door swelled against the jamb in the cold and held, frame remembering its job. In the silence between falling flakes, the land whispered its ancient consent. For the first time in years, nothing demanded vigilance. For the first time, calm felt earned. Days unspooled in disciplined loops. Feed, weigh, walk, note. The creatures stretched through them like time learning new grammar. Bulls are replaced, collars widened, door frames tested. Muscles threaded themselves under fur black enough to drink light. Snow that once threatened now greeted him as equal. Drifts parted under confident weight. The man marked changes with soldier precision, yet every checkmark softened something rigid inside him. The nightmares didn't stop, but they returned quieter, as if respect had grown between them. In the stove's reflection, two shapes often blurred into one. Winter deepened, but the cabin brightened, windows fogged with proof of living. The animal's gait moved from clumsy to calculated, a ghostless patrol claiming the yard. Growth was supposed to be measurable. This felt mythic. The logbook's pages swelled, the handwriting steadier, the lines warmer. Purpose had claws now, and they fit perfectly against wood. Morning cracked in porcelain light. Tracks crisscrossed the yard, indecipherable hieroglyphs of night business. At the center, stillness wrote its signature in fur and blood. Clean, efficient, merciful. The rabbit's shape was intact, except where it wasn't. Snow cupped the story, unjudging. The man saw discipline, not frenzy, precision, not hunger. A predator had arrived with full credentials. Steam rose thin from red patches that would freeze soon enough, sealing the evidence. He cleaned the site with care, methodical as ritual. Inside, the animal washed its muzzle with slow dignity, unbothered by sin or praise. Outside, wind carried the copper tang into the trees, where unseen witnesses adjusted their hierarchy. It was the first morning the man realized his companion obeyed laws older than obedience itself. Fear didn't visit, only understanding. Survival had moved into the house, graceful and absolute. Nature had shaken hands with nurture, unblinking.
The truck's approach announced itself in familiar rhythm. Gravel crunch, engine sigh, two-door slams. The valley's unwritten rule said neighbors arrive when silence lasts too long. Boots tracked snow through the yard, pause, then retreat a cautious half-step. The animal paced within the fence, head level, movement fluid, eyes reading intent like scent. The man opened the door to air thick with caution. Friendship doesn't need words, only presence. Observation settled into judgment. Proportions wrong, strength too balanced, calm too calculated. Snowflakes stuck in fur and refused to melt, respecting something older. The visitor's gaze lingered, then turned away. On the drive back, one thought rode shotgun. The line between wild and tame had teeth. In the cabin's warmth, a kettle hissed into quiet punctuation.
Outside, paw prints overlapped human ones until both became patterns the storm erased without taking sides. The moon cleared its throat above the ridge, silvering pine and frost into witness forms. Air thinned to glass. Then sound, low, resonant, vast, rose from the yard and poured into sky. It wasn't mimicry, it was inheritance remembered mid-sleep. The note curved over snowfields, threading timber and mountain, vibrating history awake. Inside the cabin, mugs rattled, picture frames hummed, and something primal stirred beneath scar and skin. The world beyond answered faintly, a distant chord folding back into the original. For a moment, no species mattered, only frequency, breath, and belonging. The man stood in doorway shadow, feeling ribs echo the pitch until heartbeat and howl agreed. Silence returned shyly afterward, embarrassed by its absence. The fire's reflection flickered approval across glass. Somewhere deep in forest corridors, unseen listeners marked the black voice as both challenge and homecoming. The mountains had learned a new name.
Morning light spilled through frost-etched windows, scattering in shards across the table's varnish. The man caught his reflection overlapping the animals in the stove glass, two sets of eyes, one hue of amber and fatigue. The symmetry unsettled and soothed in equal measure. War had left him partial. The creature's presence completed the outline without softening it. Movements synced unconsciously, tilt of head, narrowing of gaze, small flinches at sudden sounds. PTSD became less ghost, more companion, recognized and managed. Outside, snowmelt ticked from the roof, a clock gentle enough to trust. The logbook grew heavier, pages wrinkled from proximity to fire and thought. Purpose, once an assignment, had turned domestic. He realized discipline and devotion shared posture. The reflection blinked, one slower than the other, and for a heartbeat, the line between man and beast vanished like steam on glass. Brief, honest, impossible. Reality snapped forward like a rifle bolt. Blue strobes still pulsed through snowfall, erasing shadows and rewriting fear. The wolf's frame held its ground where porch met world, muscle relaxed yet ready. Officials shifted, breath fogging, waiting for some script to cue action. The man's pulse remembered the desert's dry thunder, synced with the storm's wet percussion. Every sense narrowed to essentials: wind speed, trigger weight, heartbeat tempo. Between gusts, quiet widened into a negotiator. The cabin's light spilled outward, softening rifle edges, making everything too human to shoot at easily. In that glow, the black shape looked carved from night itself, built for permanence, not capture. Law hung in the balance with morality as counterweight. The mountain observed, impartial, amused by human paperwork. Then air thickened, the warning sound of a predator entering stage left, something larger, heavier, deciding it wanted the scene too.
Instinct stepped aside for reason's brief argument. The woman in wool faced the yard's geometry and spoke in measures of breath and risk. Her eyes, sharp from years of diagnostics, held the exhaustion of one who's seen miracles dismissed as inconvenience. Wind folded her words, but intent carried. This bond was medicine, not menace. The officers adjusted grips, uncertain. Compassion leaked through their discipline, like warmth through gloves. The storm slowed, listening. Snow turned from bullet to feather. She drew a deep breath, as if bracing for paperwork heavier than conscience, and met the man's gaze across the distance of protocol. A single nod, small, human, treaty-sized, passed between them. Behind her, a clipboard tilted toward mercy. Nature withheld judgment. The red dots faded fractionally, enough for the mountain to exhale. For a heartbeat, science and soul stood in the same weather and didn't argue. Then came the pause, a stillness so complete it rearranged sound itself. Wind quit, Even breath held. The storm became sculpture. Every officer felt it, that primitive hush before something greater decides direction. The wolf's muscles coiled, not to attack, but to listen. Snowflakes stalled mid-fall, suspended by temperature and tension. The man recognized the sensation from ambush nights, time pausing to take attendance. In that fragile vacuum, heartbeats became percussion, each one echoing off timber like small artillery in slow motion. Somewhere downslope, a tree cracked under weight, thunder without lightning. The sound reset the world. Breath resumed, rifles lifted, decision reclaimed its teeth. But the silence had already chosen sides. It favored the creature that stood unmoved, aligned with everything ungoverned. In the wake of quiet, understanding hovered. Dominance here belonged to patience, not power. The mountain's verdict would arrive next, loud and certain.
A roar broke the verdict, deep, raw, continental. Snow fell from branches like applause too close to panic. The grizzly came through timber with intent measurable in tremors. Disease filmed its eyes, hunger stripped its caution. The convoy of humans fractured into motion, rifles re-aimed, breath pattern chaos. The wolf shifted from stillness to authority, lowering spine, lifting head, radiating consequence. The bear's bulk filled the yard's horizon, steam and madness stitched into muscle. Instinct met instinct across 10 paces of frozen arithmetic. The man felt the old readiness crawl his spine, recognized leadership in another form. The first gun never fired, nature claimed precedence. Growl met roar, echoing into frequencies that wrote ancient treaties on air. The bear hesitated, calculating wounds it couldn't afford, and withdrew into snow's gray corridors. Silence returned, this time carrying awe. The rifles drooped, humbled by their own irrelevance. Steam rose from paw prints cooling fast to crystal. The bear's shadow dissolved into trees, leaving adrenaline without destination. The wolf remained statue still until the last scent of threat diluted. Then he turned, slow, deliberate, and placed himself beside the man again, shoulder brushing thigh, posture declarative, perimeter secure, purpose fulfilled. Breath fogged upward, mingling with gun smoke that never became gunfire. The officers stared, unable to catalog what they'd witnessed. Fear had inverted into reverence. Nature's hierarchy had redrawn itself in front of paperwork. The woman closed her notebook, pen shaking just once before steadiness returned. Snowflakes resumed their descent, gentle now, unconcerned with human awe. The mountain sighed, its rhythm restored. In that fragile aftermath, no one spoke. The scene didn't need commentary. A line had been crossed between predator and protector, law and legend, and no one present wanted to step back.
Morning thinned the storm into fragments of mercy. Paper appeared where panic had been. Signatures gathered like cautious footprints on snow. The woman's handwriting shaped a fragile truce between biology and bureaucracy. The yard smelled of wet fur, ozone, leaf blurred together. The convoy prepared to leave, tires chewing slush, engines apologizing. Wind rearranged papers on the table, unsigned margins fluttering like wings reconsidering flight. Rules had bent just enough for coexistence to breathe. Temporary, conditional, but alive. Weeks later, melt bared the valley's scar tissue. Beneath sagging snow, wire loops waited, shallow graves for curiosity and hunger. The trail led from the logging road to the porch, straight as guilt. Bootprints pressed herringbone memories into thawing mud. The man followed them until forest turned confession booth. The wolf paced alongside, muzzle low, breath tasting old iron. The blood that once marked salvation had been bait, not chance. The story changed shape, but not meaning. Rescue still stood, only its context had claws. The snare wire coiled in his hand like a question never meant for court. He buried it under stones, not to hide, but to end. Wind shifted, carrying faint metallic echoes back toward towns that forget what wilderness costs. Under spruce shade, morality exhaled, sharp, cold, uncomplicated. The wolf licked snow from his paw, cleansing history without apology.
Lightning stitched the ridge in drunken embroidery, each flash sowing new danger into timber. The day's humidity folded into evening like gasoline disguised as air. Then the strike, dull, resonant, near. Smoke rose polite, then ambitious, then sovereign. The valley inhaled disaster. Wind reversed its loyalties and joined the blaze. Ash traveled miles before reason caught up. The man read the sky's grammar, orange verbs, black punctuation. The wolf circled the property, nose parsing carbon signatures, tail steady with purpose. Sirens became distant rumors swallowed by wind. Somewhere, animals moved the same direction instinct suggested centuries ago, away. The cabin's walls warmed from the wrong side. Flames wrote new topography above the tree line. The world tilted, demanding response. The man packed light, water, papers, memory. The wolf waited at the gate, unreadable, unafraid, a creature fluent in catastrophe's dialect. Smoke turned daylight to bruise. Livestock stampeded through corridors of panic, hooves striking sparks on stone. The man joined the flow, gestures sharp, movements rehearsed by muscle memory older than reason. The wolf became motion incarnate, black streak against flame, flanking, herding, commanding space with precision no whistle could teach. Fear met authority and yielded. Fire lines roared past fences, embers fell like broken stars. Somewhere in the cacophony, instinct located discipline, and both served survival. When the final gate clanged shut behind the last frantic body, silence cracked open, vast and ringing. Breath came in shared rhythm, human and not. The mountain glowed murderous but distant. In that orange theology, hierarchy dissolved, cooperation reigned. The man's skin stung with heat, the wolf's fur shimmered with soot. Between them stretched understanding wordless and whole. They were not escaping the world, they were re-earning their place in it. Night returned thin and amber. Among the char and ash, movement betrayed intent. A figure crouched where traps once waited, hand glinting with wire memory. The air carried adrenaline and the sour of fear. The wolf saw first, translating scent into trajectory. His approach was a geometry of inevitability, angle, silence, presence. The intruder's flashlight swung once, caught eye shine, froze. The body language that followed wasn't attack, only revelation. Predator met trespasser, hierarchy corrected. The man emerged from smoke, slow, sure, not savior, but witness. Metal fell to ground, surrender speaking fluent gravity. The firelight painted both figures mythic and small. Authority arrived late, paperwork later. What mattered already happened, cycle closed, origin answered. The forest would remember balance restored without footnote. The wolf exhaled a low, seismic sound that wasn't threat, just conclusion. Dawn filtered through gauze of residual smoke, coloring everything in sepia confession. Trees stood skeletal, honest about loss. The cabin survived, scorched but stubborn. The air tasted of wet ash and renewal. Officials returned with fewer words, their uniforms softened by awe. The woman carried fresh bandages and a clipboard, but her posture belonged to gratitude, not inspection. The wolf moved among debris with surgeon's delicacy, checking, cataloging, approving. The man raked embers into orderly grief piles, rhythm steady, useful.
Steam lifted from the ground where snow had melted to meet flame halfway. Nature's handwriting covered every surface: char, sprout, print. The valley exhaled. Nothing triumphant, just continuation. A new equilibrium settled. Humans humbled, wild absolved. The mountain resumed its neutral breathing, patient as ever. Healing, it seemed, spoke in whispers too soft for bureaucracy to record. Weeks reshaped chaos into routine. New fencing rose, 8 feet of compromise, silvered by frost, circumscribing safety without imprisoning intent. The wolf patrolled its edge like a philosopher, tracing boundary, testing meaning. Inside, the man adjusted to silence that no longer needed defending. The fence hummed in wind, a string instrument tuned to coexistence. Birds returned, first wary, then certain. The garden revived through ash soil, green rebellion pushing up like faith. At dusk, mountain shadows poured over wire mesh, erasing line and ownership alike. The wolf paused, gaze fixed on horizon beyond rules. He could leap if he wished, he never did. Freedom, apparently, wasn't distance, but decision. Inside the cabin, the man logged nothing, choosing to live unmeasured. The stove glowed. Outside, paw prints mapped philosophy across snow, proof that containment sometimes protects what wildness would otherwise destroy. Season turned obediently. The date circled in pencil came and went with soft ceremony. Coffee stronger, silence kinder. The valley bore no scars now, only stories. The man's mailbox filled with letters from others trying to climb out of darkness, each line a bridge built on faith and animal memory. He wrote back in calm ink, explaining routine, patience, breath. The wolf listened, head on knee, a counselor fluent in heartbeat. Nightmares had thinned to pale sketches. The logbook lay closed under a dust film, a relic of survival training. Outside, frost rhymed the fence like lace. The sky rehearsed snow. Healing, he learned, isn't event, but maintenance, like feeding, like trust. He smiled at the simplicity of that math. The wolf yawned, unconcerned with anniversaries, content in the ongoing present tense they had both chosen to inhabit fully.
Dusk draped the valley in violet hush. From tree-lined to fence came 5 silhouettes, ghosts stitched from distance and DNA. The wolf froze, head high, tail level, heart split between bloodlines. The pack's leader, a gray scar of motion, voiced invitation in ancient pitch. The response came softer, shaped by domesticated breath, but wild intention. The conversation lasted minutes, carried in posture, not sound. Then the black one turned away, walked the length of fence back to porch, and sat. Choice made. Declaration signed in silence. The forest absorbed the verdict without protest. Kinship requires no witness. Inside, the man watched through window glass fogged by his own exhale, understanding the miracle of return without departure. Outside, moonlight soldered fence shadow to ground. The wolf closed his eyes. Family, it seemed, was geography drawn by loyalty, not lineage. Night widened until sky felt borderless. Stars hung close enough to breathe on. The wolf lifted his head and offered sound, long, clean, neither plea nor boast, just existence shaped into vibration. The man answered low, imperfect, human voice threading through wolf music. 2 notes found harmony across species and history. The valley caught the duet and echoed it off ice, timber, and memory. When quiet settled, it was the good kind, full, earned, alive. The fence dissolved into suggestion. The mountains leaned nearer, listening. Smoke from the stove joined the air's blue patience. In the dark, silhouettes merged into single outline, endurance without defiance, peace without surrender. The heartbeat returned as metronome for another winter. In that rhythm lived a truth simple as breath. Salvation was mutual. Snow began again, light as forgiveness, covering tracks no one needed to follow anymore.